You're now listening to The Bryan Callen Show with your host, Bryan Callen.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the most professional podcast on the planet. Not so professional that the show's eponymous author, Bryan Callen himself, could actually be here for his own podcast. But, the sound engineering is phenomenal. And certainly our guest is a world-class human being and individual, Alvaro Bedoya, who, Alvaro, I'm reading here on your fancy Georgetown law bio that you are the founding executive director of the Center on Privacy and Technology.
That's a true story.
It's a true story. And this bio, if I was to imagine a bio for myself, this is the bio that I would write. But, the things that you have done, it's pretty amazing. And just, some context, he just flew back from Santiago, Chile, flew literally the length of the continent so that he could deliver a half-hour speech. And I'm guessing you didn't pay for that yourself?
No, thank God. But that was someone else.
That's how much of a rock star he is. Actually, more than a rock star, because rock stars have to perform for hours. They get flown across the world to perform for hours. And Alvaro only needs to show up for half an hour and drop some knowledge and then peace out, drop the mic. I'm getting on a plane.
I need to hire you as my publicist. This is excellent stuff.
So, listen, we knew each other. This is the funny thing, just to give a little background. I was doing some consulting for the Morgan Freeman Science Show Through the Wormhole, and the producers wanted to do an episode on privacy. And I'm like, who are we going to talk to about privacy? Who are we going to talk to about privacy? And then randomly I saw that you posted something on Facebook, and I was like, oh, Alvaro, what's he doing now? And then it turns out that you are the founding executive director of the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown University. So you're kind of a big deal.
I try. You're going to have to be the judge of whether I succeed at that.
So
I'm happy to help.
So, yeah, obviously this is an incredibly timely topic, right? Privacy is really in the forefront of all of our minds. Terrorism and should we give up our privacy to fight terror? And, obviously all of the amazing things that are coming out of Silicon Valley that make it easier for us to stalk our ex-girlfriends and to be stalked by the government or whoever else. So, how did you end up becoming the founding executive director of the center?
Sure. Pretty circuitously. So about, 6 years ago, I was a corporate drone at a corporate law firm. It was an excellent law firm, but it wasn't for me. And I was looking to do some work in politics and policy. And so I was hired on the then shadow staff, I guess, or the then potential staff is a better word for it, for Senator Al Franken. And so I say potential because he wasn't formally elected when I was hired. And so I left my job at the law firm not exactly knowing what would happen next. And anyways, I got hired on to Senator Franken's staff, and my first job for him was to get him ready for the Sonia Sotomayor hearings. And so, like the dutiful, nerdy lawyer, I holed myself up for about 2 weeks, and I wrote, I think it was a 20 to 25-page memo of all these, wonky constitutional law ideas that I thought a United States senator should ask about at a confirmation hearing. And I showed up on my first day, which was his first day in the office. He read it in about 5 or 10 minutes, and then he said, this is all well and good, but I want to talk about net neutrality. And I had no idea what net neutrality was, but I had to find out. And that started a long road of him having a deep interest in technology, me having no idea of what about any of this, and having to learn. And the great thing about the United States Senate is people take your phone calls. You get paid very poorly, but people take your phone calls. And I learned on the job, and he got a subcommittee on privacy, and I ran that for him.
That's awesome. And so in terms of net neutrality, that means that you must have talked to there's probably no human, this is all going to change now that we've talked to you, but historically our biggest man crush has been on Larry Lessig. So you must have ended up talking.
That's a solid man crush.
It's an amazing man crush. I mean, Larry Lessig, and net neutrality is an amazing topic. And then to follow it up with campaign finance, and Republic Lost is one of the best books ever written, I think. And we officially endorsed him for president until he dropped out, which was sad because the Democrats don't believe in democracy anymore. So talk to us about net neutrality. What is net neutrality? I mean, John Oliver did that great segment on the reason, that if you want to do anything evil, just make it sound really boring. And net neutrality is the ultimate example of that, because as soon as you hear it, you want to nap.
Right. So I'm not going to be John Oliver on this one, but the way and I think a lot of other people who care about this issue frame it, is that a company shouldn't be able to stack the deck in favor of itself and against people who have less money, and ensure that the internet runs better for them than it does for other people, and that the internet should be neutral, and that ideas should win based on their value and their strength. And net neutrality is the idea that the internet should work just as well for Comcast as it does for the startup in someone's garage. I think that we've come a long ways in the last couple of years in protecting that state online. But it's always going to be an issue as long as you have companies who want that preferred lane, and that the ability to reach people, not on the basis of partly on the basis of the strength of their content and programming, but also on the basis of their bank account.
And I think here it's really important to call back. So one of the people that Larry Lessig recommended we reach out to is Luigi Zingales at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. And, in his book, Democracy for the People, Zingales draws a distinction between pro-market and pro-business. And I think when a lot of people think about net neutrality, they're kind of like, well, the almighty dollar should decide. If I want to pay more for my customers to have faster internet access, I should. And that's a very much pro-business idea, but that supports the people who are already in power, the businesses that are already succeeding, as opposed to pro-market, which is about structuring the playing field in such a way that people can compete on the things that actually matter, which is the quality of their content, not how much cash they already have in the bank. Right.
And I think net neutrality falls in line pretty well with this idea in Silicon Valley of valuing the disruptor. You can disrupt, and you can establish the idea that beats all the others, but it's pretty hard to do that if your web page loads about 10 times slower than the incumbent. And so I think net neutrality is very much the antecedent condition, you could say, for disruption and for laying the groundwork for more innovation.
100%. And I think that's the thing is, there are certain reflexive arguments that have a tendency to appear in America where, it's like because America or because money, right? And the idea that we don't really need to have rules because money and commerce and just people paying for whatever they can will find the best solution. But that's not necessarily true. You have to set up the playing field in such a way that people can compete. And, net neutrality is a great, great example of making sure that the disruptor, because we're not really interested in, the existing business. We're interested, especially in, this age, in what the next business is that's going to destroy the existing business and create something even better.
Right. And I think this is actually a great place to start talking about Privacy Hunter, because this influence of money on policy is something that we hear a lot about in terms of net neutrality, certainly a lot about in terms of the oil industry and the banking industry and the tobacco industry. And maybe tobacco is unfair to include in this list, but for these other groups, this same dynamic of money paying the way to establish the ground legal rules for an industry is coming into play with privacy. And here's what I mean by that. So many people think that we are at the nadir, so to speak, the lowest point in our nation's history in terms of privacy from the government. And in a sense, they're right. For the first time, we're actually seeing all this news about what exactly the NSA does, what all these spooks are actually doing when they're doing things in secret. But what people need to realize, Hunter, is that our country was literally designed constitutionally to counter government overreach. We have the Fourth Amendment, which empowers the courts to, a judge to wake up one morning and say, NSA, you can't do that. Congress has a natural incentive to check the NSA because, it's not like NSA employs the same number of people as Walmart. Most people are quite skeptical as Americans of government overreach, and so you are actually seeing a big pushback on that. But the problem is our Constitution, our government, our society is not ready for a world where our most powerful industry has as its raw material personal information. We have a system where there's no baseline privacy law, and instead you have sectoral laws that, govern cable companies and phone companies and video rental companies. We haven't updated that sectoral system for commercial privacy since 2009, and I think that's because of lobbying, and that's a huge problem.
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely, 100% it's because of lobbying, right? And I think that's the other thing, too. I think that, one of the things that Zingales talks about is just that there's this huge asymmetry, right? If you are engaged in rent-seeking behavior, or if your bottom line depends upon being super interested in financial regulation, or it depends on, you figuring out ways to violate and work around privacy, it's all you're going to think about all day. And as a voter, we have to understand, every single issue. And we don't have the opportunity to understand it at that depth. And so it's very easy for them to, hide nefariousness behind, boring terminology like net neutrality and, have these incredibly long, complex pieces of legislation that we can't hope to possibly track.
And so, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, so to give you a couple of examples of what this paralysis here in D.C. has caused, take a second and think about, hold in your mind whatever you think is the most exciting technology today, or what's the most interesting technology that's come out recently. A lot of people might stop and think about wearable technology, or they might think about something like facial recognition technology. Maybe this is a little dated, but a lot of people a couple of years ago were really excited about, maps and geolocation technology. If you think of a piece of technology, here's a simple rule that underscores just how bad it is. Think about a piece of technology, and if it really came to the fore after 2009, chances are it's unregulated. So Walmart could test out facial recognition systems across several of its stores in several states and not tell anyone about it. That just happened. A lot of health and fitness apps, talking about wearables. The Federal Trade Commission did a study I think last year, and found that 12 popular health and fitness apps shared their users' information with 76 different third parties. In geolocation, you're used to tapping that yes, no button on let this app collect my geolocation, but what you don't realize is that about 50% of those apps turn around and sell that information to other people. And if you think about what your geolocation is, that's where you live, where you drop your kids off at school, where you work, where you go out, whether you go to church, whether you don't go to church, that's your life. And right now, thanks to this regulatory paralysis in Washington, that's not protected in any way, really.
Yeah, and I mean, when we were talking to, the Through the Wormhole guys, you told us that amazing, and in fact, the reason why I reached out to you was that amazing example of, using sound, using your microphone. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Definitely. So if you are like most people and you watch TV, you're probably doing it with a smartphone next to you, maybe even your computer next to you. And for an advertiser, it's very valuable to know whether someone saw an ad on their television and then looked down at their smartphone, looked up that company, and bought that product or bought that service, right? So you want to know, want to track people between their television and their smartphone. You also want to figure out whether they saw an ad on their laptop or desktop, and then they turned around, went to their smartphone, and bought that thing. That's really valuable information, right? And so up until now, advertisers have done this through estimation, basically. They've figured, we serve this number of ads in this zip code, and we had this uptick in purchases in this zip code, and things like that. But the latest technology takes that, makes all this seem like the Stone Age. The latest technology, this is what it does. From the television, when an ad is playing, it will broadcast an ultrasonic noise that is unique to that ad, such that apps on your phone will hear that ultrasonic noise and know to register your device and you as having seen that television ad, and hence telling the advertiser, A, that you own that smartphone, and B, that you saw that ad. Additionally, what is going on, so that they can figure out whether you made a purchase down the road as a result of that ad. The other thing they're doing, Hunter, is on your laptops and desktops, they are doing the same thing. They are installing, well, they're playing an inaudible ultrasonic noise in the background of an ad on your laptop or desktop that, again, your smartphone apps are listening for, and it also drops a cookie on your desktop or laptop. And now the advertisers know that, hey, Hunter owns, this Chromebook and this iPhone, right? And so now you have tracking and advertising based on that tracking that all stems from secret ultrasonic noises made by your television, laptop, and desktop.
And the thing that is most creepy about all of this is that you have probably given permission for that to happen, because at some point, some app that seems totally innocuous pops up and asks if it can access your microphone, and you said yes.
Exactly right. And so the most effective way right now to protect yourself against this is to go through to your microphone permissions on your smartphone and turn them all off. Now, as it turns out, the company that was initially caught doing this operates primarily, if not exclusively, in India, although they've just opened up a San Francisco office. They have the kind of creepy name of Silverpush, which sounds a lot like silverfish. I'm not sure, maybe silverfish go by a different name in the subcontinent. But it turns out other companies are also doing this. And so I do think it's a good idea for your listeners to be very aware of who they've granted these permissions to on their smartphone, even if this company is in India. There's others that are here in the States.
Right, but I mean, that's the thing, right? The question that we're being asked is totally innocuous. And to be clear, it's
right.
the sort of, what are the sort of apps that are asking these, microphone questions? There are often things like, I don't know, Waze or whatever, but it's lots of things where you're like, yeah, of course they can access my microphone because I need to use it to be able to speak to the app or whatever it may be. Right. And then... you're being asked, can we access your microphone? You're not being asked, can we access your microphone so that, we can, creepily track everything you do, every purchase you make, see if our ads are being more effective, you help us make money, and structure things such that we, hijack your psychology and get you to buy things you don't want. Right.
And what this is part of a broader trend. And this is really important that people realize that in the past, there was your online life and there was your offline life. And your online life was pretty neatly circumscribed to, the websites you browse and the email you send and maybe the games you play. And your offline life was everything else. It was the physical world. It was what you ate, where you went, who you went there with. It was, what you looked like and, what your health is. Now, the online world is coming to the physical world, and it's starting to track it, and it's starting to use it to track people across those worlds and basically unite those worlds. And so it's not just secret tracking and cross-device tracking via secret ultrasonic noises. It's the retailer that uses online photos of you to create a profile of you such that when you walk into his or her store, they can identify you by name using facial recognition technology the moment you set foot there. It is companies that are changing your credit score based on your physical, real-life retail purchases. It is companies that are tracking your health status so that they can market particular items to you, or creating marketing lists of people with Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease or diabetes. All that is happening right now, and our privacy law isn't ready for it in any way.
Well, and just to let you know how creeped out we are here at the studio, Rena Marie, our sound engineer, just went into her iPhone, looked at her microphone permissions, and held up, that screen to show that there are dozens of apps that have access to her microphone. And yeah, she just took them all off.
Right. I did the same thing.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the point is that, if the government was to come in and put, or, governments or corporations were to come into your apartment and, put a bunch of, security cameras in every corner of your apartment, you would be like, this is weird. It's an invasion of privacy. It's totally inappropriate. Right. But in essence, with your laptop, with your, TV and with your smartphone, they kind of already have the ability to surveil every aspect of your life if they so choose.
Right. That's mostly right. And the real question is whether there's a couple questions here. The first is whether the federal government is going to take steps to better protect people's privacy. And I think the answer to that as a result of lobbying is no. But I don't think it's time to kind of throw up your hands. I think there's a lot of chance that state governments, it could be California's, it could be any state, start passing laws to control a lot of this stuff already. To give you a contrast, since 2009, there have been 0 commercial privacy laws passed by the United States Congress, but California's legislature in that time has passed over 25 laws. Mm-hmm. And so what you're seeing is that the principal protectors of Americans' right to privacy against companies is increasingly no longer Congress, it's state governments. Now, there is a federal agency that does a lot of this work. It's the Federal Trade Commission, does great work, but the head of that is appointed by the president. So if we have, it could be a Republican comes into office, cares a lot about personal privacy, and things are stay the same, but it could be someone who has a very different view, and install someone at the Federal Trade Commission that has a much lower regard. And so I think a lot of the path forward is through the states. And if I may, I think there's a bigger question here about whether people are going to start having a backlash, I think, to pervasive tracking. And I think that there is, for a while, tracking and self-tracking has been the shiny new, the new shiny toy that people are using. But I wonder if people are going to start getting tired of trackers the way people are starting to get their brains scrambled a bit by overusing smartphones and finding that it really breaks up their day and that there is a negative impact from that tracking. It's not just positive. There's positives and negatives, and hopefully people start to realize that.
Well, and I mean, I think the interesting thing, right? I mean, so to go back to Larry Lessig's work on campaign finance, he basically talks about big money and small money, right?
Right.
And, I mean, privacy really strikes me, so small money is things like, gun control or gay rights or whatever, where, there's value in taking, either side of the position, right? You can get money out of, fundamentalist Christians by being against gay marriage, and, you can be, get money out of gay rights activists by, being in favor of gay marriage, right? So there's two sides to that bet, but there's only one side to the bet that is for financial deregulation of Wall Street, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you can only shake that. There's only one tree to shake there. You're only going to get money out of Wall Street. You're not going to get money out of people for, better financial regulation. Nobody's taking that side of the bet. And privacy is a great example of big money. Obviously, exactly right. Walmart, Coca-Cola, doesn't matter who, the defense community, they're all going to be, spending money to, allow for privacy violations. And there's really nobody who's taking the other side of the bet. Like, you're not going to raise money as a politician by being, in favor of privacy.
Right. So I may come out on that in a little different place. So I think what's truly new right now is that increasingly the wealthiest and most promising quote-unquote companies in this country are in advertising, right? Mm-hmm. So it used to be, there was a time in American history where those companies were oil companies. There was a time in American history when those companies were car companies. Right mm-hmm. now, it's the tech sector that's come to be the darling of American industry. And but it's not just the tech sector. It's the tech sector whose raw material is personal information and whose bottom line turns on acquiring ever greater amounts of personal information. So, for example, if I'm selling ads, and selling ads is essentially what Facebook and Google derive the large majority of their revenues from. If I'm selling an ad that targets you, Hunter, if I know that you are in Santa Monica, I can charge 4 or 5 times more for that ad. If I know you're at the corner of Euclid and something else in Santa Monica, I can charge maybe 6 or 7 times for that ad. And so there is a linear relationship between amount of personal information acquired and the wealth that can be obtained from serving an ad on the basis of that data. And so while I am concerned about the Walmarts or even the Apples of the world, I'm particularly concerned about companies whose raw material is personal information. And
name names, Alvaro. Name names. Go on.
Any company who primarily derives their revenue from targeted advertising. Facebook, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, these are all companies, but it's not just them. It's a whole ecosystem of companies that provide free services and then monetize them through advertising. On the other hand, you've got some companies, for the first time, like Apple, that are very consciously saying, look, we don't make money on the basis of your personal data. We make money by selling hardware and software to people. Microsoft is in the same boat. And you have got, not a clash of the titans because they're not necessarily diametrically opposed, but I think it'll be a big test if the wealthiest company in the world, which right now still doesn't, isn't monetized through personal data, which is Apple, if it succeeds and if it internally decides that competing on the basis of privacy is successful, I think that's a big day for privacy and a big day, frankly, for the future of privacy in America over the next several decades. But if it looks back at this big push that Apple has made on privacy and Apple itself says, guys, it wasn't worth it, that's bad news. And so I'm worried about the companies that monetize that. I'm also worried about the other companies. But what's truly new about this time we're living in now is that those darlings of industry have as a raw material that personal information that's never happened before. And that will have a powerful impact on this country's ability to regulate that space.
Well, and here's the fascinating thing. So I actually last week had a meeting with a guy who's starting up a new company that is a facial recognition company, and that will literally, that's the whole point of it, is to be able to use already existing cameras to pick up people, figure out where they're going, where are they shopping, how do they feel about things, all of that sort of stuff. But his perspective, which I thought was very interesting, is that I think generally as outsiders we look at the purchase by Facebook of Instagram and as dumb. Like how many billions did you spend on Instagram? That seems so silly. But his point was that no, Instagram has basically the largest repository of pictures of people in the world, and that database of pictures of people is incredibly valuable.
That's right. And it's also eyeballs.
Right.
Okay? And so in the advertising business, you need a good ad, but if you put it in a sewer, it's got 0 eyeballs, right? And so part of the reasoning behind these purchases of companies like Instagram or companies, what's another big purchase? Oculus Rift, and companies like that, is that they're eyeballs. They are the new virtual real estate that you want to put your ads on. And so right now, I believe, I don't use Instagram as much as I use Twitter or Facebook, but I believe right now there still aren't ads on it. But there will come a day when they start monetizing the eyeballs on those screens. And so that's another part of the strategy.
Yeah, it really is, pretty shocking, all the stuff that is going on. And I think, again, the real battle is that you have these people like Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, who is intensely interested in getting access to your personal data in ways that you don't even realize. Right. And then, he, very generously offers to give away 99% of his wealth to himself. Which is like a fantastic, it just feels, the whole thing feels so Roman, you have these big public displays of generosity and wealth. The big sort of tribal chieftain. And then meanwhile, what are they doing in the background?
Yeah, I think time will tell as to what that gift is. I was of two minds of it. I first saw it and I thought, bravo, may everyone else do the same thing. And then there came the issue that this was invested via an LLC.
Yeah.
But there is, being someone who does, run and, co-founded and helps run on the board of directors now a nonprofit, there are a lot of consequences to running a nonprofit, a lot of being at the mercy of the folks at the IRS that can impede the actual charitable mission. And so I am now more in the middle than I was initially. At first, I think I thought this was just an unalloyed good. I don't know if I'm in the other camp yet. I think this could be, most people with this amount of wealth give away 5%, and so if of that 99% of wealth, and by the way, I just threw out the number 5%. I have no idea what it actually is, but I'm pretty sure it's not 99%. If it ends up being that 50% of these funds are invested the way Gates, for example, has invested his money, then that'll be a pretty powerful day. But I do think it's a good idea to be skeptical, and I like that analogy that it's very Roman, the big displays of wealth and largesse. I do see that.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing, right? Is if you were like, listen, I want to really drive research and innovation, and so I'm moving my wealth into this new thing that will ultimately be able to drive innovation and blah blah blah. That's fine, but that wasn't how it was branded. He tried to brand it as a charitable gift, right? Which I understand is much more appealing PR, but that's disingenuous, right? And I think that, if anything, is more revelatory of what is the real intent. And I mean, the reality is that you look at how the majority of people have reacted. Like, most people are so cynical right now about the world that they desperately want to believe that somebody is doing something good and positive and all of that sort of stuff. But I just think that, we're increasingly seeing a lot of this sort of stuff. There's the reality of what's going on and what's being done. I mean, you look at the presidential election. I mean, this is a disaster. It's a disaster when you have people who hate literally every candidate, and all they're trying to decide is which candidate do they hate least. Right.
Yeah, it's a dark day in terms of that, and the fact is it's a dark time for the U.S., and I'm not one of those people who comes out and says that. I think, to give you one very sobering statistic, and all this that we're talking about, by the way, feeds into this, and I think breeds that distrust, but inequality. So it used to be that the United States was one of the best places where, if you were born into the bottom quintile of wealth, your chances were greatest at moving into the top quintile. Now, we've come pretty far from that, and in fact, the United Kingdom, actually, if you were born in the United Kingdom in the bottom quintile, you now, as of today, 2015, have more of a chance of moving into the top quintile than you would if you were born in the U.S. And that, in my mind, is kind of the point of the United States.
Right.
The point of the United States is no more ingrained, stodgy, hereditary transfers of wealth. You make it if you work hard. And when the UK is beating us at that game, that's a dark day indeed. And that is also all of that feeds into the background of this distrust of individuals like Mark Zuckerberg, because the distance between the average person and the CEO of the nation's most successful companies is vastly, infinitely larger than it was 50 years ago. And the wealth inequality is all a part of that frustration, and so we can't analyze that frustration without keeping in mind that inequality is at the heart of it.
Well, and I think that's the thing. I mean, your family's from Peru, is that correct?
Right.
And so, as you're talking about this, and, as I was sort of reading through your bio, like, I just keep on thinking about Hernando de Soto. And, I mean, Peru is sort of like the ultimate example of that. So, I mean, I've talked about that book before on the podcast, and actually, I was in Peru this summer and had a chance to meet with one of the senior people at Hernando de Soto's Institute.
Terrific.
Yeah, and I mean, so, in again, just for listeners, because we actually, I mean, funnily enough, so we interviewed, The Last Days of the Inca Empire by Kim McQuarrie?
I don't, but I should probably.
It's probably, when I was going down to Peru, I was asking what is the book on the Inca, and everybody said, Kim McCory's like Last Days of the Inca. And so we interviewed Kim McCory a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about that. But so there was this group called the Shining Path, which was this Maoist group, and essentially there were all these poor people in Peru, and they said the only way to fix this is to have a Maoist revolution. And so Hernando de Soto, in response to that, said, no, it's not that the poor want Maoism or communism. What they want is they want the chance to actually compete in markets. They want property rights. And so he wrote this book called The Other Path, which is basically to say what we need to do is, and he and all of the people at his institute went and tried to do the very simple things it would take to set up a legitimate business, get a business license, get permission to run a bus route, get a permission to have a bus, a stall. And essentially the barriers to entry were so high that effectively they couldn't join the regular market and so had to exist outside of the market. And that was it was bureaucracy that was strangling the ability of ordinary people to innovate, which is what they wanted to do. And it's essentially very much the legislative equivalent of not having net neutrality, right? It's not easy to access the market. It's not easy to compete, and I think that's really what we're seeing is that, this inequality that we're experiencing in the United States, which is being disguised. And Zingales talks about Berlusconi as being the ultimate example of this. The Cayman, the crocodile, Berlusconi managed to convince everybody that he was pro-business. And he was, because he was all about using the government to support the entrenched interests. But the effect of that is to destroy capitalism and to prevent people from entering markets and allowing people to compete. And I think we're seeing more and more of that, with these privacy violations, with the attacks on net neutrality, with the rise of, increasingly complex financial regulation, just an increasingly opaque government that doesn't allow people to come in and compete, which is really the foundation of capitalism, is the foundation of the United States, is the foundation of social mobility.
Right. And in a sense what you have is the industrial market supplanting the democratic market. And you see this as in, the marketplace of ideas that is supposed to be the American capital and American Congress, where you consider the merit of the idea, you also consider this public support. And you have these industrial incentives that are very much stacking the deck there. And one thing, and I encourage you to come out here to D.C., Hunter, because I think it would give you incredible fodder for all the ideas that you're grappling with. You have this amazing disconnect between opinions about what people want in D.C. and everywhere else. And let me give you two examples. One is commercial facial recognition, and the other is the supposed right to be forgotten. We're talking about facial recognition a lot, and so very quickly, people in D.C. think, we probably shouldn't have privacy rules for this new exciting industry, and if I handicapped it, it'd be about 10 or 20% of people think, or maybe 30 or 40% of people think we need rules for this. Mm-hmm. You leave the Beltway, and it is 80 or 90% of people that say, are you crazy? You are going to use this technology to identify me by name without my knowledge through the permanent characteristics of my face? That's bananas. And if you look to the right to be forgotten, and I encourage you to look at this, there's a fascinating thing going on with the right to be forgotten. And for everyone who doesn't spend too much of their time studying this stuff, the right to be forgotten is the idea that if there's something embarrassing about you, or not even embarrassing, just some fact about you, or some link to you maybe that's untrue, or that's irrelevant, that comes up online, you should have the ability to ask a search engine like Google to say, hey, take that link down. And if you talk to the American public, they'll say, of course that makes sense. What if I'm the victim of a crime? What if, I'm in an accident? Or what if I went bankrupt 10 years ago? That shouldn't be the first thing that defines me when people do a search online. But if you ask people in D.C., they think that, oh my God, this is the heart of the First Amendment. How on earth could you pass a law that would let people control this? Even though the vast majority of people do want it. And there's actually a lot of fascinating things going on there. I don't know have you looked into this at all, the right to be forgotten?
No, not at all.
And so part of the things that's going on here is that people who are opposed to the right to be forgotten say, oh, well, you're going to, internet searches and Google search results are the truth. You want to control the truth. And in reality, what people are missing is that in science and in politics, the truth is of paramount importance. But in our social lives, the truth is just one of many values that we think are important. And when you put the truth on a pedestal in our social life, you disregard a lot of other factors like happiness, like trust, like dignity, that in our social world we very much value. And so there's a very strange thing going on in Washington, in that people are not. The opinions in the Main Street of D.C. are very different from the opinions in Main Street everywhere else, and I think lobbying and corporate power has a lot to do with that.
Well, and I mean, it doesn't get much more fundamentally American than the right to reinvent yourself, which is,
Sure.
Exactly fits with the right to be forgotten.
Right. And the other thing that people need to know is that there has never been a time up until only recently where corporate speech was put on the same pedestal as political speech. Right? If you look at the history of the First Amendment, it's all about people's ability to assemble and to pray and to petition their government. And it's been turned into this idea that I can advertise and act as a company in any way I want, when it wasn't envisioned that way. And let me give you a couple examples. So this whole right to be forgotten arose out of a Spaniard who went bankrupt. And when people Googled his name, even though this happened 10 or 15 years ago, the first thing would come up is, Mr. Torres went bankrupt. And he thought this was ridiculous, and so he sues. I may be getting the facts a little off. First, he sues the newspaper, and I also think he sues Google, and eventually an EU court says, Google, you have to take this down. And some people in the United States, particularly in D.C., say this is an outrage. This is horrible. But consider this: that if I were a credit rating agency, Hunter, and let's say you were a credit agency, and I was, a guy that lives in the United States. If I had gone bankrupt 11 years ago, it would be illegal for you, the Hunter Credit Rating Agency, to tell anyone about that bankruptcy, because our law says that any bankruptcy that's older than 7 years old, that you effectively can't tell people about it, right? And so this idea that the right to be forgotten is this totally foreign concept to America is absolutely wrong. But people don't see it that way.
Well, and I think that's the thing. I mean, privacy in general just seems like, it's this, I think in people don't understand how privacy connects to the things they really care about. Like
right.
we really, this is one of the great things that you said when we had that call with the producers of Through the Wormhole was people don't, privacy is so abstract, but as soon as you talk about specific violations of privacy, we get so uncomfortable that we're like, that's not okay, which is why even I was talking about, if the government came and installed security cameras in every corner of your house, you would be like, this is a total violation, this is not okay. But you don't, and here you really get into people's psychological biases, but if you're like, oh, my phone is there and my TV is there, you think of those as goods, right? They're a sign of the American dream working. But the fact is that those have then been hitched up to these tremendous violations of privacy. Right.
And that's exactly right. And I guess I'm agreeing with myself in that if I planted that seed, in your brain, then I'm just agreeing with myself. But two powerful examples of this that you really have to spell out, the concrete harms of privacy. Let's do one and the right to be forgotten, and one for school books. The first is, let's say, you are the victim of a crime, Hunter, and not any old crime. You're the victim of a weird crime, right? And I'll let you and the listener's mind, wander for a second to figure out what that weird crime is. But it comes out that you, Hunter Motz, are the victim of that weird crime. And someone does a post and says, local, podcast personality and author Hunter Motz is the victim of this super weird crime, right? And it's so weird that when people look at it, they click on it. And that's all it takes to drive that to the top of your search results. This has nothing to do with who you are. All the success you've had, whatever trials you've had that were part of your professional life, nothing. This just weird thing randomly happened to you, and it's at the top of your search results. In Europe, you now have a way to say, hey, Google, this is irrelevant. and this was a truth that was imposed upon me. It is not a very valuable truth as a result of that. This is just a truth that was imposed upon me. Take it off. You don't need to erase at the source. Just take it off. You can do that. In the United States, you can't do that. And the other example, and that's wrong. The other example is Martin Luther King. A lot of people say, well, why do I care about privacy? I have nothing to hide. Who had something to hide, both politically and personally? Martin Luther King. And you don't need to have something to hide to care about the right to privacy, because I assure you that the people are doing good in this country. Many of them have something to hide personally, and many of them, as a result of government deeming what they do to be illegal, have something to hide. And so, in Martin Luther King's time, it was illegal to march on the streets of Selma, without a very special permit from the racist city council. It was once legal to own people and illegal for them to run away. It was once illegal to be gay and in the military. And so, you should believe in privacy if you think that sometimes government makes mistakes and government gets it wrong. And you shouldn't believe in privacy, and you should believe in total, utter transparency for everyone if you think that government always gets it right. And I think when framed that way, and you put forward that it's not just Martin Luther King, it's every leader in the history of civil rights in the United States that's been surveilled. Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, W.E.B. Du Bois. You realize that it's much more. It's much more about letting people live their lives outside of the judgment of government than it is about protecting, your porn watching habits on YouTube. And so I guess it's not YouTube. That stuff isn't allowed on YouTube, Hunter.
No, it isn't.
And so I do think it's important to make the concrete case. Yes.
But you wouldn't know that because you never watch porn, right, Alvaro?
0% on the record.
Yeah. But anyway, so here's a question that I think is particularly interesting for you, right? So carve out for our listeners, what does the dystopian future that you think we're headed to, and what does the utopian future that you think we could be headed to look like?
So I don't know if we're headed to either, but
okay.
The dystopian future is a future where there's no more anonymity in public. Mm-hmm. It's a future where when you're walking down the street and people are walking past you, you immediately know, who they are, where they're from, where they work, what their likely salary is. Do you know anyone with them, in common with them, and all of that. And not only do I think that that's just a stifling world, I also think that's a world where a lot of wonder and is removed. One of the most wonderful things in life, and I think this is a really undervalued thing, one of the most wonderful things in life is not knowing, is discovering, is coincidence, is stumbling upon something, discovering something that you never imagined. And one of the best places for this, and this is slightly afield of the end of anonymity, is Venice. If any of your listeners have been to Venice, it is a place where you get lost. It is a place where you walk down a street and suddenly you don't know where the hell you are. You are in one of the most beautiful places you've ever been. It looks like Mars, and you are lost. And that is part of the wonderful event, the wonder of Venice, discovering, not knowing. I am afraid of a world where everything is known. And I think that is a much scarier world, both in terms of privacy, but also in terms of human happiness, than people realize. People import this idea of knowledge as an unalloyed good from the realm of science and from the realm of politics into our social life, and it doesn't belong there.
Right, because it's so easy. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's not just the loss of wonder. It's the fact that you could easily, you make a choice, and then your whole life is defined by that choice.
Precisely right. And I should add that the coda to that Venice story is that you no longer get lost in Venice.
Yeah.
You have a smartphone, and it tells you where you are, and so you can get from point A to point B, and there's no losing yourself. And I think people overestimate the value of knowing everything about themselves and other people, and underestimate the value of not knowing all of that. The utopian world, and I don't know what utopia even looks like, but I think a better world is a world where people still have the ability to make mistakes. People still have the ability occasionally to make serious mistakes and have the ability to fall in love and explore their sexuality and really explore life without fear that other people will be judging them and tracking them. And so I don't think that utopia is a life without Facebook or utopia is a life without GPS maps. I just think it's an idea where you still have room for error, and you still have room to have a world that is all your own. And that's what I'm afraid of, a world where you can't have that private space, and I want a world where you can still preserve that. And which, by the way, is why encryption and the ability to protect your information from anyone you want is so important. It allows you to have that private space and keep others' eyes off of it. And yes, there will be cost to it, but I think the benefits far outweigh it.
And I think, Peter Turchin, who we also interviewed for that privacy episode, he talked about the fact that, privacy is really like, we tend to think of it as it being, all one way or all the other, but it's about finding a golden mean. Because as an individual, I want nobody to know any of the things that I have done. But, as a member of a society, I want, the government to know everything that everyone has done so that I don't have to worry about terrorism or crime or anything like that. And, particularly you've talked about, there's a competition between the Facebooks of the world and the Apples of the world in terms of how important violating your privacy is to them. And so I think that's a large part of the conversation, and humans don't do well with those sort of nuanced conversations. But, it really is about trying to find what is the right level of privacy,
Right, and let me give you an example of just how far off we are from that mark. So let's say, because in other areas we historically, in terms of privacy, we have found that golden mean. So let's say, Hunter, that you are a vicious jaywalker and a vicious, late payer of traffic fines. Okay, you're just an unreformed jaywalker and tardy traffic fine payer. And in the United States, under our wiretap laws, I can't say, District Attorney Jones, I got this Mott's character here, and he is an unrepentant jaywalker. We need to wiretap him and figure out where he's going, and so we can interdict him and arrest him at the scene of the crime. And by the way, jaywalking and failing to pay traffic fines and speeding, those are technically crimes in most jurisdictions, right? They're not usually crimes, but they're technically crimes. And so in 1967 and 1968 and onwards, the federal government has said, okay, look, you can wiretap people for drug trafficking, for murder, and for all these serious offenses, but you can't wiretap people for non-serious offenses, for what lawyers would call malum prohibitum. Malum in se is wrong in itself. Malum prohibitum is it's wrong because we banned it. And so we have reached a balance on wiretapping. And I'm not even saying it's the right balance, but we've reached some kind of balance where we wiretap for the, quote-unquote, big boy crimes, for the serious crimes, but we don't wiretap people for jaywalking and for being late on their taxes or for causing a public disturbance. Fast forward to 2015, when it's not just wiretapping in the prosecutor's toolbook. It's facial recognition technology. It's geolocation tracking. It is any number of other means and instrumentalities to achieve surveillance. And all of that technology, basically, that postdates wiretapping, there is no limit on when and where it can be used. Increasingly with geolocation tracking, you do need to get a warrant. But for facial recognition, I can point, if I'm a law enforcement officer and I don't like the look of some protesters, I can take a photo of them and I can identify them by name using facial recognition technology, and then I can, I can arrest them for disorderly conduct or for blocking the entrance to a building or for impeding traffic. And so right now, there is not the most rudimentary limit on how some of this very powerful technology can be used. And that is not true of the surveillance technologies of the 20th century. It is true of the surveillance technologies of the 21st century.
Well, Alvaro Bedoya, founding executive director of the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown, Thank you so much. And I hope that you have a book in the works.
There's plotting involved.
Good.
I hope so too. And I hope maybe the next time in a couple years when we talk again on this show, which will by then have surpassed Serial, become the gold standard of podcasting, that I will have a book to hawk.
Well, or even better, I mean, if you lose your war and Facebook and Google rule the world, hopefully we will be the only show on the air, and that's how we'll.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call myself a war, but I hear you, man, and by then I'll have a good show for your monopoly.
Perfect. So yeah, I mean, it's just amazing how much all of these different interviews, talking to you, Larry Lessig, Luigi Zingales, like it all really meshes towards that idea that basically, yes, we really have to protect the rights of individual in order to create a dynamic marketplace where people can compete, because it's competition that leads to great results, not protectionism.
Right, that's very true.
Yeah. Alvaro, thank you so much.
Pleasure, Hunter. Thank you so much for having me.
I look forward to hawking your book.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. And have a wonderful day.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Bryan Callen Show. And Bryan, in the interests of, preserving his privacy, may or may not have been in the studio this whole time and remained silent. But if you believe that Bryan Callen could sit here through 45 minutes and not talk, then you don't know him very well. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, ways to, stalk Alvaro on Twitter and Facebook will be in the episode write-up. Thanks so much. Bye.
You've been listening to The Bryan Callen Show with Bryan Callen. Be sure to like him on Facebook. Just search for Bryan Callen Comedy. And follow him on Twitter. Just search for @Bryan Callen. You can also find him online by visiting his website. Just go to bryancallen.com. Until next time, bye-bye.